Cowboy took in a lost Apache girl. Turns out she was a gorgeous Apache widow's daughter. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the vast plains, painting the sky with shades of orange, gold, and pink. The wind blew softly, carrying with it the dry scent of sagebrush and dust, a familiar smell to Ethan McAllister, a lone cowboy who had spent most of his life roaming the open lands of the Southwest. Ethan's boots crunched against the hard-packed earth as he guided his horse, Copper, along the winding trail back to his small homestead. His face, weathered by years under the sun, showed the quiet strength and patience of a man who had learned to face life without expecting much from anyone. The day had been long. Ethan had ridden miles to check on his cattle, ensuring none had wandered too far. He knew the dangers that lurked in the open land: wild animals, sudden storms, or even strangers with less than honorable intentions. He had grown up near native communities and had learned to respect them, but he had also learned caution. Still, he often felt a sense of calm when surrounded by the open sky, a freedom that few townsfolk could understand. As he guided Copper around a bend in the trail, Ethan noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or some other small animal, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a small figure struggling through the tall grass. It was a girl, no older than 10 or 12, her clothes torn and dirty, her hair tangled with dust and debris. She stumbled and fell several times, each time rising with difficulty. Her small hands brushed the ground as she tried to pull herself forward, and her face, though young, carried an expression of fear and exhaustion. Ethan's instincts told him to be cautious. He slowed Copper to a walk and studied the girl carefully. There was something about her that stirred a protective feeling deep within him. Perhaps it was the desperation in her eyes or the way she seemed utterly alone in such a vast, unforgiving land. Whatever it was, he knew he could not simply ride past her. "Hey there," Ethan called gently, raising a hand to show he meant no harm. The girl froze, her wide eyes flicking toward him. She made a small, frightened sound, almost a whisper, before turning her head away. Ethan dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Copper watched him silently, sensing the tension in the air. "Don't be afraid," Ethan said softly, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "I won't hurt you. Are you lost?" The girl said nothing, only shook her head slightly. Her lips trembled and she blinked rapidly to keep tears from spilling. Ethan noticed the raw cuts on her knees and the scrapes on her arms, likely from falling repeatedly while trying to find her way. Her small frame shivered, either from exhaustion or the evening chill that was beginning to settle over the plains. Ethan knelt down to her level, placing a hand lightly on his knee to show calmness. "It's okay. You don't have to be alone. You can come with me." For a long moment she didn't move. Her dark eyes studied him carefully, assessing whether this stranger was truly trustworthy. Then, almost imperceptibly, she took a small step toward him. Her bare feet were dusty, and her clothing hung loosely on her thin frame, but there was a certain resilience in the way she held herself, as if she had been surviving against great odds for a long time. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small canteen of water. "Here," he said, "you must be thirsty." He held it out, and after a brief hesitation the girl took it with both hands. She drank quickly, spilling some over her chin, and Ethan couldn't help but smile at the sight. "You're safe now," he said gently. "My name is Ethan." "What's yours?" The girl hesitated again, then whispered something in a language Ethan did not understand. He recognized it as Apache, though he could not speak it himself. Still, he could see that she was trying to communicate, and he nodded to encourage her. "I don't understand, but that's okay. You can tell me later." After a moment, she lowered the canteen and looked up at him with an expression that was part fear, part curiosity. Ethan extended his hand slowly. "Come on, I'll take you somewhere safe. You won't have to be alone anymore." She glanced back toward the distant hills, as if remembering something, or someone, but then she slowly placed her small hand in his. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness. He had known hardship and loneliness, but there was something different about this child, something that made him want to shield her from the dangers of the world. Ethan led her gently back to Copper. He lifted her carefully onto the horse, making sure she was seated safely and comfortably. Copper shifted slightly under the added weight, but the horse was calm, accustomed to Ethan's careful touch. As they rode toward the homestead, the girl clung to the horse's mane, her head resting lightly against Ethan's arm. She did not speak, but there was a quiet trust growing between them. By the time they reached the small cabin where Ethan lived, the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The cabin was simple, a single room with a fireplace, a few pieces of furniture, and a small kitchen area. Yet it radiated warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the harshness of the desert outside. Ethan helped the girl down from Copper and led her inside. "You can rest here," he said, pointing to a small blanket he had folded neatly in a corner. "I'll get you some food and water. You must be hungry." She nodded faintly, her eyes wide as she looked around the cabin. Everything was new to her, but there was something comforting about the way Ethan moved, calm, steady, and careful. He returned with a bowl of warm broth and some bread, placing it gently in front of her. The girl hesitated, then began to eat slowly, as if testing the safety of this new environment with every bite. Ethan watched her for a moment, noting the way she handled herself. She was small but resilient, her movements careful and deliberate. There was a quiet strength about her, a determination that had likely carried her through whatever hardship had brought her to these plains alone. After she ate, Ethan helped her clean the cuts on her knees and arms, using a cloth and some water from the canteen. She flinched slightly at the sting, but she did not cry. Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "You're strong. You've been through a lot, but you're going to be okay now." The girl's eyes met his, and for the first time there was a small spark of something other than fear, trust. It was fragile, like the first bud of spring after a harsh winter, but it was there. Ethan knew that this trust would take time to grow, but he was willing to wait. As night fell, Ethan lit a small fire in the fireplace. The crackling flames filled the room with warmth, and the girl watched, mesmerized by the dancing light. Ethan sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," he said softly. "We have time, you're safe here." She nodded again, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Eventually, she curled up under the blanket in the corner, and Ethan could see her breathing slow as sleep took over. He sat quietly, keeping watch, feeling a sense of responsibility and connection that he had never felt before. The desert outside was silent except for the whispering wind and the occasional distant call of an owl. Inside, the cabin was filled with a different kind of quiet, one of safety, warmth, and the beginnings of trust. Ethan knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The girl's past was a mystery, and the road to understanding her story would take patience and care. But for now, he was content to sit by the fire, knowing that he had made a difference in this small life that had wandered into his own. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to care for her, giving her food, tending to her wounds, and offering the quiet companionship that only someone who has lived a life of solitude can provide. Slowly, the girl began to open up, sharing fragments of her story in whispers, small words, and gestures. Each moment revealed more about the hardships she had endured, the dangers she had faced, and the strength that had kept her alive. Ethan listened without judgment, offering guidance and comfort where he could. He did not push her to speak more than she was ready for. Instead, he allowed the simple routines of life on the plains, the tending of the small garden, the care of the horses, and the quiet evenings by the fire, to provide a sense of stability that she had not known for a long time. By the end of the first week, a bond had begun to form between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. The girl, whom Ethan had come to think of as Aida, began to trust the world around her again, finding solace in the simple acts of kindness that Ethan offered without hesitation. And Ethan, who had long been a man of solitude, found a new sense of purpose in protecting and guiding this young life. It was a beginning, fragile yet full of promise, a story of survival, compassion, and the unexpected connections that can arise even in the harshest of landscapes. Ethan knew that their journey was just starting, and that the true story of Aida's past and future had yet to unfold. But in that moment, with the fire crackling and the desert night stretching endlessly outside, there was a sense of peace, a quiet triumph born not from grand victories, but from the simple act of offering safety and trust to someone who needed it most. The days that followed. Aida's arrival at Ethan's cabin were filled with small, ordinary routines, yet each day brought subtle changes that reflected the growing bond between them. The vast desert and plains surrounding the cabin remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside the simple wooden walls, there was warmth, safety, and a sense of quiet order that Aida had never known before. Ethan noticed how cautious she still was, even as she began to move more freely around the cabin. Every sound outside the small windows made her pause, every shadow seemed to demand her attention. But slowly, she began to settle. She helped with small chores, gathering kindling for the fire, sweeping the floor, carrying water from the nearby well. Each action, though simple, was a lesson in trust. She was learning that the world could offer kindness, not only danger. In return, Ethan was patient. He did not rush her to speak of her past, understanding that trauma and fear could not be hurried. Instead, he shared small glimpses of his own life, of the cattle he tended, of the storms he had faced alone in the desert, and of the days spent riding along trails that seemed endless. These small stories comforted her, giving her a sense of normalcy, and gradually her shyness began to soften. One morning, the sun rose bright and warm over the horizon. Aida had already begun her day before Ethan stirred from his bed. She moved quietly about the cabin, carefully making a small fire to warm water for breakfast. Watching her, Ethan felt a mixture of pride and concern. She was learning quickly, yet she was still so young, and he feared that the harsh realities of the world outside could reach her even here. "Good morning," Ethan said, stepping into the kitchen area with a small yawn. Aida glanced up, a small smile breaking through her otherwise serious expression. "Morning," she whispered. Ethan noticed the careful way she carried herself, as though every movement required thought. He had seen children before, but none with such quiet determination and awareness. She was alert, aware of every detail, every sound. It was clear that life had forced her to grow up quickly, and yet there was still a spark of childhood curiosity that had survived. As they ate a simple breakfast of bread and warm porridge, Ethan spoke gently, encouraging her to tell small pieces of her story. At first, she shared only fragments, speaking in short, broken sentences. She told him of the long journey she had endured, of the nights spent alone under the stars, of the hunger and fear that had often threatened to overwhelm her. Ethan listened carefully, never interrupting, offering only reassurance and gentle nods. "You're very brave," he said finally, placing his hand lightly on hers. "Most people would have given up long before now." Aida looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his, and for a moment there was no fear, only recognition, a silent acknowledgement that someone saw her strength, even when she doubted it herself. The days continued in this rhythm. Ethan tended to the small garden outside, planting vegetables and herbs, and Aida helped, learning how to carefully water each plant, how to pull weeds without harming the young shoots, and how to recognize the subtle signs that a plant was thriving or struggling. These lessons were not just about survival, they were about patience, observation, and understanding the world in ways that words alone could not teach. In the evenings, after the chores were done, Ethan would bring out a small collection of books he had gathered over the years. They were simple volumes, mostly about nature, animals, and the occasional story of frontier life. He encouraged Aida to look at the pictures, to ask questions, and slowly she began to respond. Her vocabulary was limited at first, but with each passing day she spoke more, sharing thoughts, observations, and even small jokes that made Ethan laugh quietly by the fire. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of violet, Ethan sat beside Aida on a small wooden bench outside the cabin. The desert stretched endlessly before them, silent except for the soft rustle of the wind. "Do you miss home?" Ethan asked softly. Aida paused, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. After a long silence, she nodded slightly. "I don't know," she whispered. "Home, it is gone." Ethan understood. He had faced loss in his own life, the death of family members, the loneliness of the open plains, the struggles that came with living in a land where every day demanded effort and resilience. Yet, he also knew that home was more than a place. It was safety, care, and connection. And slowly, he realized that he could offer her that sense of belonging, even if only for now. As the days passed, Aida began to show her personality more fully. She was curious, asking questions about the plants, the animals, and the tools Ethan used. She observed the way he worked with the horses, mimicking small gestures as she learned. There was a quiet intelligence in her actions, a thoughtful approach that impressed Ethan. He often found himself smiling at her observations, noting how keenly she noticed details others might overlook. Despite her growing comfort, there were moments of fear and hesitation. A sudden noise outside, the shadow of a hawk passing overhead, or the distant howl of a coyote would make her flinch, her small body tensing with alertness. Ethan never scolded her for this. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to teach. He showed her how to listen to the land, how to recognize which sounds signaled danger and which were harmless. Slowly, she learned to move through the world with awareness, not fear. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Ethan noticed that Aida had begun to hum a soft tune, a melody he did not recognize but found soothing. The sound carried lightly on the wind, blending with the rustling of the leaves and the distant call of birds. It was a small, simple gesture, but it marked a turning point. She was beginning to feel safe enough to express herself, to allow the world to see a piece of her inner life that had been hidden for so long. Evenings became times of quiet reflection. Ethan would often sit by the fire, watching Aida trace patterns in the dust or play quietly with small pieces of wood she had collected. He shared stories of his youth, of the cattle drives, of the storms that tested his courage, and of the moments of beauty and surprise he had encountered in the open plains. Aida listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or offering her own observations. These moments created a bond, not just of caretaker and child, but of shared understanding, trust, and respect. Ethan also noticed the ways in which Aida had retained parts of her own culture. She would hum tunes her mother had taught her, use gestures he did not understand, and occasionally speak words in her native language. While he did not always grasp the meaning, he respected her heritage and never forced her to abandon it. Instead, he allowed her to maintain her identity, understanding that part of her strength came from her roots, from the family and culture she had lost but never forgotten. Through these routines, Ethan began to see her not as a fragile child, but as a young girl of remarkable resilience and intelligence. Her survival in the desert, her careful observation, and her willingness to learn all spoke of a spirit that had endured hardship yet refused to be broken. He felt a mixture of admiration and protectiveness, knowing that the world outside the cabin was full of challenges that she might face, but also confident that she was capable of rising to meet them. As the weeks turned into months, the small cabin became a place of stability and growth. Aida's health improved, her hair became cleaner and less tangled, and her movements grew more confident. She began to take initiative, helping Ethan with tasks before he asked, learning the rhythms of the land and finding joy in small achievements. A vegetable harvested, a fire built correctly, a bird watched quietly in the distance. Ethan, in turn, found his own life enriched. He had spent years in solitude, accustomed to the quiet companionship of his horses and the endless horizon. Yet, Aida's presence brought warmth, laughter, and meaning that he had not realized he had been missing. He found himself thinking ahead for her, planning not just for survival but for growth, education, and the nurturing of her talents and spirit. Despite the comfort of routine, Ethan knew there were still unanswered questions. Who had she been with before she became lost? Why had she been wandering alone? And what would the future hold for her? These questions remained unspoken between them, understood only as shadows that occasionally passed across their shared days. Still, for the present, they focused on each other. Ethan provided safety, guidance, and knowledge of the land, while Ida brought curiosity, resilience, and a spark of life that had been missing from the cabin for too long. Together, they navigated the small triumphs and challenges of daily life, learning from one another and forming a bond that transcended words. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color and the first stars appeared in the sky, Ethan sat beside Aida on the cabin porch. She rested her head on her knees, gazing quietly at the horizon. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You're doing very well," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." She looked up at him, a faint smile crossing her face. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only trust and a growing sense of belonging. Ethan knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew that together, they could face them. In the quiet of the desert evening, the cabin filled with warmth, safety, and the beginnings of a life built on trust, compassion, and shared strength. It was a beginning, one that promised growth, healing, and the deepening of a bond that would shape both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. For Aida, it was the first taste of security in a long time. For Ethan, it was the discovery of purpose beyond solitude, a chance to protect, nurture, and witness the strength of a remarkable young girl who had wandered into his life, forever changing it. The weeks turned into months, and the bond between Ethan and Aida grew stronger with each passing day. She had become more comfortable in the cabin, moving through the routines with confidence and a quiet sense of purpose. Ethan noticed how she would often pause to observe the smallest details. The way the sun hit the prairie grass in the morning, the tracks of animals that passed near the cabin, the changes in the wind and weather. It was clear she had a keen mind and a thoughtful spirit, and Ethan admired her for it. Despite her growing comfort, Aida remained guarded about her past. She would occasionally hum or speak in her native Apache language, but she never revealed much about her family or where she had come from. Ethan understood. Some wounds ran deep, and some memories were too painful to share. He never pressured her. Instead, he focused on creating a life that felt safe, steady, and predictable, a life where she could heal. One late afternoon, Ethan decided to ride into the nearby settlement to pick up supplies and check on a shipment of goods. Aida had insisted on helping, curious about the small community beyond the plains. Ethan was hesitant at first, but he realized that this was an opportunity for her to see the wider world, to experience a sense of belonging beyond the cabin. He carefully explained the plan. She would stay with a trusted neighbor while he completed his errands, and then they would return together. As they approached the settlement, the clatter of hooves on dirt roads and the murmur of voices reached their ears. Merchants were calling out prices for produce, blacksmiths were hammering metal in their shops, and children ran through the streets laughing. Aida's eyes widened, taking in the sights and sounds. It was a world so different from the solitude of the cabin, a bustling place full of life, yet overwhelming in its energy. While Ethan attended to his errands, Aida wandered a short distance, careful to stay within sight. She was fascinated by the variety of people, farmers, traders, and travelers from distant lands. She observed how they interacted, the gestures they used, and the expressions on their faces. Though she remained cautious, there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes, a desire to learn and understand this new world. It was then that she noticed a woman standing near a market stall. The woman's presence was commanding, her posture straight, and her eyes sharp, scanning the crowd with an intensity that made Aida stop in her tracks. There was something familiar about her, something that stirred a memory deep within. Aida's heart began to race, though she could not understand why. She felt drawn to the woman, as if an invisible thread connected them. Ethan, finishing his business, returned to find Aida staring at the woman with a mixture of fear and recognition. "Who is she?" he asked gently, noticing the unease in Aida's expression. Aida shook her head, unable to speak. She had never met this woman before, yet there was something undeniable in the way her body reacted. Ethan, sensing the importance of the moment, approached slowly. The woman had also noticed them and was now walking toward them with purposeful steps. "Ethan McAllister?" the woman asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The woman's eyes softened slightly as she looked at Aida, who was still clutching Ethan's hand. "And this must be Aida," she said gently, almost in disbelief. "You found her." Aida's eyes widened further. The woman's words, though unfamiliar, carried warmth. There was no anger, no judgment, only recognition and something else, relief. Ethan realized that this woman was no ordinary stranger. "My name is Nakamis," the woman continued, kneeling slightly to be at eye level with Aida. "I am your mother." The words struck Aida like a sudden gust of wind. Her small body stiffened, her mind racing to comprehend the meaning. She had never known her mother, had never heard her voice, and yet here she was, standing before her in the middle of the settlement. Aida's eyes filled with tears and she clung tighter to Ethan, unsure of how to react. Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe, take your time." Nakamis extended her hands toward Aida but did not push. She waited patiently, understanding that the reunion had to happen on the child's terms. Slowly, Aida stepped forward, her small hand hesitating before finally reaching out to touch her mother's. The connection was immediate and profound, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that had never been broken, even through separation and hardship. Nakamis pulled Aida into a careful embrace. The young girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder, feeling a sense of warmth, safety, and belonging that she had not known for years. Ethan watched quietly, a mix of relief and awe filling him. He had known that Aida's past was complex, but seeing this reunion unfold before him made him realize the depth of the story that had brought her to his cabin. After a long moment, Aida looked up at her mother, eyes wide and searching. You're really my mother," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nakamis nodded, her own eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, my child, I have searched for you every day. I feared I would never find you again." Ethan stepped back, giving them space, but Nakamis turned to him, her expression one of gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, "for taking care of her, for keeping her safe." Ethan shook his head modestly. "I only did what anyone would do," he replied. "She needed help and I couldn't leave her out there alone." Nakamis studied him carefully, then nodded with respect. "You have a good heart," she said. "I can see why she felt safe with you." Aida, still clinging to her mother, finally began to speak, though her words were hesitant. She shared fragments of her journey, of how she had become lost, of the hardships she had endured. Nakamis listened intently, holding her close, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and relief. Ethan realized that this moment was more than a reunion. It was a bridge between worlds. Aida had survived the desert, learned to trust, and now, through him, was reconnecting with her heritage and her family. He felt a profound respect for Nakamis, who had raised her child alone, endured loss, and maintained hope even in the darkest times. Over the next few hours they spoke together, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. Aida gradually began to relax, recognizing that she could belong in both worlds, the safety of Ethan's cabin and the love of her mother. Nakamis explained the circumstances that had led to their separation, a raid that had scattered her family, the dangers of the land, and the long search that had finally brought her daughter back. Ethan listened quietly, offering only support, realizing that his role was now part of a larger story. He had given Aida safety and care during her most vulnerable moments, and now he was witnessing the culmination of a journey he had only begun to understand. By evening, the three of them had formed a tentative routine. Nakamis invited Ethan to share a meal with them, and while Aida ate quietly between them, he observed the way the mother and daughter interacted, the small gestures, the shared glances, the unspoken understanding that had existed despite years of separation. Ethan felt honored to be included, sensing that his kindness had not only saved a life but had helped restore a family. That night, as they prepared to leave the settlement, Nakamis turned to Ethan. "You've done more than you know," she said softly. "Aida would not have survived without you. I owe you a debt I cannot repay." Ethan smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "Seeing her safe is repayment enough," he said. "I only hope she finds the life she deserves." Aida hugged him tightly, a silent farewell that conveyed gratitude, trust, and affection. Ethan felt a lump in his throat, realizing how deeply he had grown attached to the girl he had taken in. Yet he also knew this was right. She belonged with her mother, with her family, with the life she had been denied for too long. As he watched them walk away, Ethan felt a mixture of pride, sadness, and hope. The desert around him seemed different now, less lonely, more alive with possibilities. He knew that their lives had intersected for a reason, that the small acts of kindness and trust he had offered would echo in Aida's future, shaping her into the strong, resilient young woman she was destined to become. The reunion of Aida and Nakamis was not the end of the story. It was a new beginning. Ethan realized that life had a way of weaving connections, of bringing people together in unexpected ways. Through the hardships of the desert, the challenges of survival, and the quiet moments of trust and care, he had become part of something larger, something profoundly human and enduring. In the days that followed, Ethan maintained contact with Nakamis and Aida, ensuring that their transition back into family life was smooth. He offered guidance when needed, helped with supplies, and continued to provide a supportive presence. Though he no longer lived in the daily presence of Aida, he remained an important part of her life, a symbol of trust, protection, and the kindness that had carried her through the darkest days. Through this experience, Ethan learned lessons about resilience, compassion, and the power of human connection. He realized that life was richer when one cared for others, when one offered safety, guidance, and empathy without expecting anything in return. And he knew that the story of the lost Apache girl would remain with him forever, a story of courage, reunion, and the enduring strength of family, both chosen and given. The reunion had left a mark on all three of them. Aida's eyes now held a quiet confidence, a mixture of relief and curiosity about the life she had been separated from for so long. Nakamis, her mother, had become the anchor she had needed, guiding her carefully through the emotions and realities of reconnecting with family after so many months alone. Ethan, too, felt a subtle shift within himself. He had gone from being a solitary cowboy, used to the quiet of his land and the simplicity of his daily routines, to someone who had touched another family's story and had become a meaningful part of it. After the initial reunion, Nakamis expressed her gratitude to Ethan more fully. She wanted him to understand just how much his actions had meant, not just for Aida, but for her as a mother who had feared she would never see her daughter again. They sat together one evening in the settlement, sharing a modest meal, and she spoke in her calm, deliberate manner. "You cannot imagine how long I searched," Nakamis said quietly, her eyes reflecting years of struggle. "I never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that she would be found. And then here she is, safe, cared for, and growing stronger every day. You are part of that story. Without you," her voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Ethan nodded humbly. "I only did what I felt I should. She needed help and she found it. I'm glad I could be there for her." Despite his modesty, Nakamis could see the truth in his words. His care had gone beyond simple kindness. He had created a safe environment where Aida could begin to heal, where she could begin to trust, and where her natural curiosity and intelligence could flourish. She had given him a look of respect that Ethan quietly returned with a nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that the bond formed through these shared trials was genuine. Ethan knew that Aida's transition back into her mother's life could not be rushed. The months she had spent alone had left deep impressions on her, and he understood that the sudden shift from solitude to family life would require patience and understanding. Nakamis agreed. They decided to take gradual steps, allowing Aida to adapt to her mother's care while maintaining the routines that had brought her stability. The following days were carefully planned. Ethan continued to accompany them on short trips around the settlement, introducing Aida to the people she might interact with in the future. He explained to her the small rules and expectations of life among townsfolk while ensuring she still had space to be herself. Aida observed everything with keen attention, learning quickly but cautiously, her trust in Ethan providing the steady reassurance she needed. At first, Aida was hesitant to fully leave Ethan's side. The bond they had formed over months of shared hardship had created a deep sense of security, and the thought of navigating the wider world without him was daunting. Ethan noticed this and never pushed her. Instead, he encouraged small steps, gently nudging her toward independence while being ready to step in when needed. One afternoon, they walked together to a nearby stream, a short distance from the settlement. The water glimmered under the sunlight, and the sound of flowing water brought a calmness to the air. Aida dipped her hands into the cool stream, laughing softly as the water ran through her fingers. For a moment, she allowed herself to forget the hardships she had endured, focusing instead on the simple pleasures that life could still offer. Nakamis observed quietly, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've given her something very rare," she said. "A sense that life can be gentle, even when the world is harsh." Ethan smiled, watching Aida's small feet kick lightly in the water. "She's strong, smarter than she knows. She just needed a chance to feel safe and cared for." Over the next few weeks, the trio's interactions deepened. Nakamis began to share more about their family, teaching Aida about her heritage, her culture, and the traditions that had been interrupted by the raid that had scattered their lives. Aida listened intently, absorbing the stories, songs, and lessons that had been kept alive through her mother's memory. Ethan often watched, feeling a quiet admiration for the way Nakamis balanced strength and tenderness, passing on wisdom while allowing Aida to form her own understanding of the world. One day, as they prepared a meal together, Aida suddenly paused and looked at Ethan. "Will you always be here?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. Ethan crouched to meet her eyes. "I may not always be right next to you," he said gently, "but I'll always be someone you can trust, and I'll always care about you no matter what." Aida nodded, a small smile forming, a mixture of comfort and understanding passing between them. She turned back to her mother, continuing her work, but Ethan could see the relief in her expression. The reassurance had given her courage, a quiet strength that would serve her well in the months and years ahead. Nakamis recognized the importance of this relationship as well. She had spent so much of her life navigating the challenges of survival, often alone, that seeing Ethan's unwavering support for her daughter brought her hope. She welcomed his guidance and presence, not as a replacement for her own care, but as a partner in nurturing Aida's growth. Together, they created an environment of trust, learning, and stability. During one quiet evening, as the sky shifted into hues of pink and deep blue, Ethan sat beside Aida near the edge of the settlement. The wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle. Aida spoke softly, telling him fragments of her dreams and hopes for the future. She expressed a desire to explore more of the land, to learn about the plants and animals, and to continue building the skills she had developed during her time with him. Ethan listened, offering encouragement. "You have a lot of strength, Aida, and you have people who care about you. The world can be tough, but it can also be full of beauty and opportunities if you know how to look for them." Aida's eyes brightened, a reflection of both excitement and a newfound sense of security. She realized that life could be more than survival. It could be growth, learning, and connection. Ethan's influence had given her the confidence to trust, to hope, and to embrace the world with cautious optimism. As the days passed, they began to plan small excursions beyond the settlement, allowing Aida to experience new environments while still feeling protected. They visited nearby hills, observing wildlife and the changing seasons, and spent time teaching her practical skills such as fishing, identifying plants, and basic first aid. Each excursion reinforced her confidence and independence, while the presence of both Ethan and her mother provided a steady foundation of safety and care. Through these experiences, Ethan noticed how Aida's personality flourished. She became more expressive, more willing to ask questions, and more eager to participate in the activities around her. Her laughter became more frequent, her curiosity more pronounced, and her trust in the world grew steadily. Even in moments of challenge, when the terrain was difficult or when she encountered animals she had never seen, she displayed resilience and adaptability, a testament to the lessons learned during her time alone and the guidance she had received from Ethan. Nakamis continued to integrate Aida into their family life, teaching her about responsibilities, traditions, and the importance of community. She emphasized respect, courage, and wisdom, encouraging Aida to draw strength from her heritage. Ethan watched these interactions with admiration, realizing that the young girl he had found wandering the plains was now becoming part of something larger, something enduring, a family, a culture, and a sense of identity that had been threatened but not lost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky glowed with soft twilight, Ethan and Nakamis walked together, leaving Aida to explore near the settlement. They spoke quietly about her progress, the challenges that lay ahead, and the delicate balance of trust, freedom, and guidance that would continue to shape her growth. "She is remarkable," Nakamis said softly. "I see the child I lost, and yet she is stronger, wiser, and more capable than I could have imagined. And it is because of you." Ethan shook his head, smiling humbly. "She had it in her all along. I only helped her see it. You have given her the love and guidance she needed to survive and thrive. I am honored to have played a small part." Through their shared care, Aida was learning to navigate a world that was both familiar and new, one that required courage, adaptability, and a strong sense of self. She began to take on responsibilities within her mother's household, helping with cooking, cleaning, and tending to small livestock. Each task reinforced her skills, independence, and confidence, while also strengthening the bond she shared with both Ethan and her mother. The relationship between Ethan, Aida, and Nakamis became a source of stability, trust, and learning. Ethan continued to offer guidance, mentorship, and a steady presence, while Nakamis provided the warmth, love, and cultural teachings that shaped Aida's understanding of her identity. Together, they created an environment that allowed her to grow, heal, and thrive, a rare and precious gift for a young girl who had endured so much. Over time, Ethan realized that his role in Aita's life had transformed. He was no longer just a protector or a caretaker. He had become a teacher, a mentor, and a steady source of guidance. His presence allowed her to experience safety, trust, and learning in ways that would carry her into the future. And in turn, Aida brought light, curiosity, and resilience into his own life, enriching his solitary existence with purpose and connection. The desert, once a lonely expanse, now felt alive with possibilities. Ethan understood that life's true value lay not in isolation, but in the connections formed through care, trust, and shared experience. Aida's journey from fear and uncertainty to safety, understanding, and growth was a testament to the power of compassion and patience. By the end of these weeks, Aida had become a bridge between worlds, the rugged, solitary life of a cowboy and the rich, enduring traditions of her Apache heritage. She was learning to navigate both, gaining confidence, independence, and a sense of belonging that had been denied to her for so long. And Ethan, observing her growth, felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his kindness had played a part in shaping a life full of hope and promise. Time continued its quiet rhythm across the desert plains, and with each passing day, Aida's life became richer, fuller, and more secure. The months of hardship, loneliness, and fear that she had endured slowly faded into the background, replaced by moments of laughter, learning, and connection. Under the careful guidance of her mother, Nakamis, and the unwavering support of Ethan, she began to understand the true meaning of family, safety, and trust. Ethan, for his part, continued to maintain his presence in her life, though he understood that the girl he had once rescued now had a family and a home to return to fully. Yet, their bond had deepened into something enduring. He had become a mentor, a friend, and a guiding figure, a steady hand that reminded Aida of the kindness, patience, and understanding that had carried her through her darkest days. The transition was gradual but steady. Aida began to take on more responsibilities within her mother's household, learning skills that would serve her well in the years ahead. She helped prepare meals, tended the small garden, and cared for the livestock. Each task taught her patience, responsibility, and attention to detail. Nakamis watched her carefully, offering guidance when needed and praising her when she succeeded. Aida's confidence grew with every accomplishment, and she began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as someone capable, strong, and deserving of love and care. Ethan remained a constant presence, visiting frequently to share knowledge of the land, the animals, and the skills he had mastered during his years on the plains. He taught Aida how to track animals, read the signs of the weather, and navigate the terrain with caution and respect. These lessons were practical, but they were also lessons of resilience, observation, and independence, tools that would serve her far beyond the desert. One crisp morning, Ethan led Aida and her mother to a small hill overlooking the plains. The sun had just begun its ascent, casting a warm, golden light across the landscape. From this vantage point, the vastness of the land stretched endlessly, a mixture of rugged beauty and quiet danger. Ethan pointed out landmarks, small trails, and signs of wildlife. Aida listened attentively, asking questions and practicing the observations Ethan taught her. "This land can teach you many things," Ethan said gently. "You only need to watch carefully, listen, and be patient. There is a rhythm to it, a way of understanding that comes with time and attention." Aida nodded, absorbing every word. She felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that she could now navigate the land with more confidence than she had ever imagined. Her mother watched silently, a mixture of awe and gratitude in her eyes. She recognized that Ethan's guidance had not only provided safety in the past, but had also given her daughter the tools to thrive independently. The days continued with a rhythm that balanced work, learning, and leisure. Aida began to explore the settlement and the surrounding lands more freely, with her mother and Ethan always nearby to ensure her safety. She discovered small pleasures in life, watching the sunrise, listening to birdsong, helping neighbors with small tasks, and practicing her skills with the animals. Each day brought growth, each experience added to her sense of self, and each interaction strengthened her connection to the world around her. Evenings were a time of reflection and storytelling. Around the fire, Aida, Nakamis, and Ethan shared tales of the past, dreams for the future, and lessons learned from the land. Nakamis told stories of her own childhood, the traditions of their people, and the resilience required to endure hardship. Ethan added his experiences, sharing moments of triumph and challenge from his years on the plains. Aida listened with rapt attention, her imagination and understanding expanding with each story. One evening, as the stars began to glitter in the clear desert sky, Aida turned to Ethan. "Do you think I can do anything I want?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Yes," he said simply. "You can do anything you set your mind to. You've already proven how strong and capable you are. The world can be tough, but you are tougher, and you have people who care about you, who will help you when you need it." Aida's eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and determination. She realized that life was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, choice, and the freedom to shape her own path. For the first time, she felt truly empowered, ready to embrace the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. Nakamis, observing the exchange, felt a deep sense of relief and pride. Her daughter had endured so much, yet she had emerged resilient, intelligent, and full of potential. She understood that the bond Aida had formed with Ethan was a vital part of her growth, a connection that had provided guidance, protection, and a model of kindness and integrity. Nakamis was grateful, not only for Ethan's actions in the past, but for the enduring presence he continued to maintain in their lives. As the months turned into seasons, Aida's skills, confidence, and understanding of the world grew steadily. She became more independent, yet she never lost the bond with Ethan or the deep connection to her mother. Together, they navigated life on the plains, facing small challenges and celebrating accomplishments, learning from each other and creating a shared story of growth, trust, and resilience. One day, Aida and Ethan were checking on a small herd of cattle when they encountered a group of travelers passing through the region. Ethan introduced Aida, explaining her story and her connection to the land. The travelers listened with interest, and Aida, though initially shy, spoke confidently about her experiences, her knowledge of the land, and the lessons she had learned from Ethan and her mother. She realized that her story could inspire others, that her journey of survival, trust, and growth had meaning beyond herself. The encounter reinforced a lesson Ethan had often shared with her, that life was not just about enduring hardship, but about using experience, knowledge, and compassion to help others, to make the world a better place, even in small ways. Aida began to understand that she could carry forward the kindness and guidance she had received, sharing it with those she met, and helping others find their own paths. As the years progressed, Aida continued to thrive. She developed strong skills, a keen mind, and a compassionate heart. She balanced the lessons of her mother's heritage with the practical knowledge and resilience taught by Ethan. She became a bridge between worlds, honoring her culture while embracing the tools and wisdom that allowed her to navigate life with confidence and independence. Ethan, too, found fulfillment in seeing Aida grow into a capable young woman. The lessons he had shared, the care he had provided, and the trust he had built were reflected in her confidence, independence, and understanding of the world. He realized that his role had not been temporary or limited. It had created a lasting impact, shaping a life that would carry strength, wisdom, and kindness into the future. Nakamis observed the transformation with pride and gratitude. Her daughter had endured unimaginable challenges and emerged resilient, strong, and capable of shaping her own destiny. The bond between mother and daughter deepened, strengthened by the experiences they had shared and the love that had carried them through the hardest times. Ethan remained a respected and valued presence in their lives. He was no longer simply the man who had found Aida wandering the desert. He was a mentor, a friend, and a trusted guide. Their connection was built on shared experience, mutual respect, and the enduring understanding that acts of kindness and care could shape the course of a life. Together, the three of them continued to navigate life on the plains, facing challenges with courage, celebrating accomplishments with joy, and cherishing the connections that made their lives richer and more meaningful. They had learned that survival was only part of life. Growth, trust, and compassion were equally important. Aida's story, once defined by fear, loneliness, and uncertainty, had transformed into one of hope, resilience, and empowerment. She had discovered the strength within herself, the value of guidance and mentorship, and the importance of family and community. She had learned that trust could be earned, kindness could be given, and that even the smallest acts of care could have profound effects. One evening, as the sun set over the plains and the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, Aida, Nakamis, and Ethan sat together outside their cabin, watching the world around them. The air was warm, the wind gentle, and the land peaceful. Aida leaned against her mother, feeling a sense of security and belonging she had never known before. Ethan sat nearby, quietly observing, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and connection. "This is home," Aida whispered softly, a sense of contentment in her voice. Ethan smiled, nodding. "Yes, it is. You found a place where you belong, a place where you are safe, loved, and respected, and you have the strength to face whatever comes next." Nakamis placed a hand on Aida's shoulder, her eyes filled with love. "You are my daughter," she said gently, "and together we will face life's challenges, celebrate its joys, and cherish every moment. You are never alone again." In that quiet evening, the three of them sat together, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The hardships of the past were still remembered, but they were no longer burdens. They were lessons, guiding lights that had shaped resilience, trust, and love. The desert, once harsh and lonely, now felt alive with possibility, beauty, and the promise of a future defined not by fear, but by strength, compassion, and connection. Aida's story had come full circle, from a lost, frightened girl wandering the plains to a confident, resilient young woman surrounded by love and guidance. Her journey was a testament to the power of kindness, trust, and human connection, proving that even in the harshest conditions, hope and growth could flourish. Ethan, watching her with quiet pride, understood that their shared experiences had changed him as well. He had learned that compassion and care could transform lives, that trust could be built through patience and understanding, and that the bonds formed through shared hardship could endure far beyond the moment of crisis. As night fell and stars glittered above the desert, the cabin glowed with warmth, laughter, and the quiet strength of a family reunited and strengthened by experience. Aida had found her place in the world, surrounded by those who cared for her, guided by those who had nurtured her resilience, and inspired to face the future with courage, curiosity, and hope. Her story, once defined by loss and fear, was now a story of triumph, connection, and enduring love, a story that would continue to unfold, filled with promise, possibility, and the quiet certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never face them alone.